Okay.
So today we're talking about space and gender. Those are our two different topics today. And I'm going to probably have to defer to you guys about much of the gender stuff because you have had to face gender, not racism, but gender prejudice in ways that I haven't had to. So let's start by talking about space. And one of the big issues about space is, how do we carve out the spaces we give to each other? And how do we value those different spaces? For example, Leticia, how many do you help us to understand how it is that the Mexican barrio is different from, and you don't have to go into all the details, but different than an Anglo neighborhood? What happens there in some broad ways that's different?
Well, I think what I've always sensed is the barrios had somehow within the greater scheme of a city or a town maintained that sense of village.
Yeah.
That smaller sense of village where everybody knew each other, everybody watched out for each other. My dad used to joke in the 70s and the 80s that the mandated busing was a bad idea. Because as soon as you got the kids and you were sending them outside of the barrio, they misbehaved. Because they behaved in the barrio because everybody knew your mother.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and the culture was a little bit different, because if Jose 2 blocks down the way saw me screwing up, he knew where my mother lived.
Happened often, from what I hear.
Now, I did them big enough that I didn't do them often. But even though they may not have been friends, they knew whose parents the kids belonged to. Yeah. So, yeah, say for instance, a young man's driving in a car and he was driving recklessly and he had a young woman in the car. Parents, an adult may have seen it, may not know the parents, but the culture allows that adult to go, you know, I saw your son, he did something kind of stupid, he had a young lady in the car, and he could have hurt himself and that young lady. I don't see that in today's white community, or even 1970s white community.
Yeah.
It's a more familial setting than a white neighborhood is.
And it's an amazing thing about Hispanic culture, is the sense of barrio, the sense of community that happens there is remarkable. And yet we completely overlook it. You overlook it probably almost every single time you drive up to Phoenix, because you drive by one of the most enduring barrios as you drive on the freeway to go up into Phoenix. Just to the right of, you know, where Arizona Mills is at, where 60 goes off into Mesa, right there. Right before that, all of that area, those 3 miles leading up there, for about a mile wide and about 3 miles long, is Guadalupe. And Guadalupe is a long time barrio, a Hispanic barrio. People that don't even speak Spanish but have culturally that history there still are connected to it, like my friend Andy Torres. It's a long and amazing history there, which is not present as much in the white neighborhoods.
That's when the lady who was remodeling a barrio in Barrio Viejo.
Yeah.
Remodeling one of the homes, she came to me and said, Leticia, I'm bringing the culture back. And it was difficult for me to say, but I had to correct her. I said, no, you're not, because you're not bringing the people back. It's not the buildings, it's the people. And in white culture, a lot of times it's the neighborhood, it's the buildings, it's the updates.
Yeah. But one of the things that's interesting about Tucson versus Phoenix, for example, is that Tucson has neighborhoods. You realize why Tucson has neighborhoods and Phoenix doesn't? Hispanic culture, because barrios develop in a smaller space where Anglo culture tends to broaden out larger, right? And so it's that history that we have that gives us that type of smaller sense of.
And also the difference in Tucson is you joke about, kind of joke about the castle wall, right? But even in the foothills in Tucson, much of that was ranching land. And there are pockets within the foothills that is now considered affluent that are still owned by a lot of these families that were here prior to us, this part of the country, prior to Gadsden Purchase. And they never let go of the land. So cultures moving in from out of Tucson since the turn of the last century don't understand that they moved. It wasn't that they took over empty land like they did around Phoenix, right? They moved into the Hispanic culture. And a lot of us are too strong-headed to ever move out.
Yeah. So I mention all of that so that you recognize that you have cultural spaces here within what you already know, right? Spaces that in many ways we are honoring, right? That it's good to have that type of space, but sometimes we forget that it is. And so we talk about ghettos, or we talk about barrios, and we kind of look down on, right? Instead of saying what is powerful about that racialized space. And he's often used the word racialized to mean something negative. In this chapter, he's using it as something positive. There's something that emerges out of that needs to be wonderfully preserved, right? Think of it this way. I think this is a good example. How many have gone to Thanksgiving at somebody else's house and it wasn't quite the same? Or done Christmas and they had different traditions over there, wherever it was. It wasn't that they were right or wrong. It's that the traditions that were there gave meaning and form to the space that you lived in. And so his contention is, if we're trying to make all space into white space, all space into what I'm used to space, what do we lose? And specifically, what do the minorities around us lose in the midst of that?
Flip side of that too, what don't you get?
What don't you get?
Holidays.
Uh-huh.
Come to my house, you get turkey and tamales.
Yeah.
Yeah, and food is one of those places that we join together culturally.
That's right. So think about what are some of the specific your family type of traditions that nobody else or that most people don't have, and the way you honor those in your family. What are some of the things you do to raise yourself up, like the turkey and tamales? What's something you carry forward? Go ahead, Pam.
So I think I've told you before that I am from Central Ohio, born in Central Ohio, and my family has been there for several hundred years. And I don't know about, the whole family, but my more central family with my parents and my grandparents, we never had cranberry sauce. We always had cranberry orange relish, and which I much prefer anyway. So I make that every Thanksgiving, no matter at whose house I am. And it's, to me, it's refreshing, but it's, I remember when I was a child and I got old enough, and it wasn't an electric grinder, it was a hand grinder. that I got to be in charge of grinding the apples and the cranberries and all the fruit up together.
Mhm.
And so that's part of my tradition, my very British Isles family. And
Yeah.
I don't know whether that really comes from the British Isles or not, but most of my family is from the British Isles. So,
Well, Pam, the bottom line is it doesn't really matter if it comes from or if it's better or worse. I've seen people argue about dressing, right?
oh yeah,
Dressing. Doesn't matter if your dressing is better or not. It's what you're used to. And it's that used to that gives it the power and the strength, right? Maybe the other recipe is actually culinary wise better, but you don't care.
well, Henry and I were in Costco this afternoon and they had these huge sweet potatoes. And what my family called sweet potatoes are the yellow sweet potatoes, not the
Mhm.
red ones. And I looked at them and I said, oh, those are red ones. We don't do those. I said, maybe we should. Maybe we're missing something.
Right. And the good news is, Pam, is that on a regular basis does change as your family has gone forward through history and Thanksgiving traditions. I'll bet different people have brought in something else and said, what about this? Well,
Yeah.
we've never done green bean casserole before, but then it becomes a regular,
Yeah.
right? And that's not a bad thing, but it's the thing that says they have to have exactly what I have. That I set the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is exactly how it has to be done. How about the rest of you? What are some of those traditions that are not necessarily what everyone else does? Go ahead.
I came from a Catholic background, Latino Catholic, and the Latino Catholic has La Posada, which is the journey of Joseph and Mary Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
And a lot of, which is a lot different than the Anglo culture.
Mm-hmm.
And in my own family, my own immediate, with my children, we kind of took a spin on that. We would put up a Christmas tree. My birthday's 3 weeks before Christmas. So on my birthday, we put up the tree and just put the lights on it. And the lights stayed on there until we went to midnight mass. When we came home from midnight mass, we decorated the tree for the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's take it a little further. My family I started the tradition that we didn't exchange gifts until January 6th.
Yeah. And all those different traditions. January 6th is where a lot of Europe exchanges gifts. That's the Three Kings Day. You know, that's when they brought their gifts. So my friends from Serbia, they do Serbian Christmas on the 6th as well.
Well, for my family, it's interesting because when Thanksgiving's in Tucson and the two daughters from Philadelphia come to Tucson, then one of my daughters is an observant Jew. She is converted from St. Francis, being raised, to Judaism. And so the one who's cooking the turkey has to make sure she goes out and finds a place in the community to buy a kosher turkey.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if it was just us without the Philadelphia daughter, I mean, one of them there is not Jewish, but one is. And so, but that's automatic now. So if we're cooking, we all observe whatever is needed when we're cooking and the Orthodox family is with us. And most of the time we avoid meat and just have fish or vegetarian, because that's easy. And you can't have meat and dairy at the same meal and so forth. But for Thanksgiving, everybody wants turkey. So I know one time when it was here, my daughter Julie went out and made sure she could buy a kosher turkey,
Mm-hmm.
and that we made sure that we didn't have anything dairy to serve with that meal, so that the Jewish family could be totally welcome and at home. So it's sort of interesting.
And what I hear you saying is, how do we honor those different traditions?
Yes.
Rather than like what I think our president is doing about those Democratic run cities, which dishonors somebody else. right? Somehow puts a negative on a certain way of being. Somehow we have to allow that to be different.
Yeah, yeah. We often forget, I find, that we're Judeo-Christian, that our background is Jewish, and
Yeah.
that Jesus was always Jewish, It
Yeah,
just,
absolutely.
yeah.
It especially gets,
Can I tell a funny story that a
Yes.
Jewish friend from the East Coast told me? This one is just, it's a true story, but there was an evangelical church, and a Jewish man in that community, and I don't remember if this was Philadelphia or wherever, but the Jewish man had read and read and read about it and decided he wanted to visit a service. And so one time he came and was in the narthex and ready to go in, and somebody came up to him and welcomed him to come to the service. And then she looked at him a minute. She said, "Aren't you Jewish?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, then you can't come here because this is a Christian community." And he looked at her for a while and was astounded. And then he walked up to the altar, took the cross that Jesus was on, brought it down, and said to her, "Then he can't be here either."
yeah,
That was a true story. And I thought that was a great one.
a great
That was a
story.
great one.
And Kay, what's really interesting is the premise of how we do our services are based on how Jewish services in the temples are done. It's almost, if it was a silent movie, you couldn't tell the ritual apart, right? Especially between Jews and Catholics. It's almost identical.
Oh, that's funny, because I don't think that that's true when I compare St. Francis to going to synagogue with my daughter in Philly, but I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. Yeah. That is
The
interesting.
difficult part is whenever it is that we take and we elevate one culture, one idea, one tradition, one
Yes.
something to the extent, especially where we're trying to eliminate something else.
Yeah.
Right? We're trying to say yours isn't good enough. Like,
Well, I want to add one more thing when we're talking about neighborhoods where we were raised. I was raised in an all-white city, small town, 35,000 in Michigan. And I think I've mentioned that here before, that it was the Midland, Michigan, home of Dow Chemical, that didn't hire Jews, Latinos, Blacks, or anything. So the city was essentially all white. But we lived in a very lower middle class area of this community. And it was very much what you were describing, Leticia, it was very much a neighborhood, and we all cared for each other and so forth. So yes, it was a white community, but it was absolutely a neighborhood. And I think other neighborhoods were in those days also neighborhoods, and not as much as it is now. I mean, I'm on a little cul-de-sac, and I know most of the people, but not really, really, really well. And some of them I still don't know, and I've been here 7 years.
yeah. Go ahead, Pam.
I would say, Kay, that are there children in your neighborhood?
Yes.
Oh, so there are, because the street that we moved onto, the houses were built in the 1970s. And I'd say probably half the people on the street came at that time. There are no children on our street. There was only one child on our street when we first moved here, and she has since gone to college. And I guess that the people who moved in next door to us, their son was a senior in high school when they moved in. And so without children, it's very difficult for, I shouldn't say it's difficult, but it's more unusual for neighbors to get together. Although I have to say, with this pandemic, we do a lot of talking across,
You're right,
across to each other.
because some of the kids are brand new. They just moved in a short time ago. Another family with kids that was our next door neighbor that I'm close to moved up to Phoenix. So I think you're right. I hadn't looked at it quite that
It's
way.
very
about
disappointing
whether
to me
kids
for
are part of the
Halloween. We
neighborhood.
have never
But I think
had
you're right.
anybody come for Halloween to our house since
Yeah.
we've moved here. And I have always
I
loved
haven't
to have the
either.
kids come.
Yeah.
So,
I haven't either.
All right, so let me tell you about our old neighborhood up in Phoenix.
all right.
The old neighborhood. Our home was built in 1949. It was the original John F. Long neighborhood. And all the people bought in way back when. And so when we got there in the mid 90s, most of those people were on the upper end of their life, right? If there were kids, it was kind of like what you just described. They were high school kids or just graduated or something like that. And so it was all older folks relatively. And so we didn't get any kids for a long time. And so we got into the habit of going to the movies. But then the neighborhood began changing and younger families began buying those houses. And we realized that it might be really kind of fun to stay around here. Right. But then we'd already gotten in the habit of going to a movie on Halloween.
Yeah.
Right. And so those traditions, you have to decide, do you change them now? Is it something different than what needed to be done before? But it's a difference between me changing it and you making me change. That's the difference that
Yes.
he's talking about.
Yes. Yes.
Leticia?
And
Part of
Kay, I
it-
understand that. And yeah, I'm gonna be 59 next month. So
A kid.
I'm not real young anymore. Tucson, when I was growing up, didn't hit 100,000 people until 1979. Tucson proper. So it was a small community in a 30 mile square footprint.
Space. Yeah.
And very much like you're describing, you had the village sense neighborhoods. What happened in much of the Southwest, especially in Tucson, if you understand where the community center is and what the expanse of that barrio was, Tucson surrounded that barrio and then said, it's Blythe. We have to tear it down. We have to make a better place for you, rather than seeing that they were destroying a community. And at that time, the community was destroyed for a very particular reason. It stood between where the whites were building the city and the water source.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And
So the
what you just-
motives were a lot different. And that happened all through the Southwest.
That's right. And in the reading, he talked about the Black Ghetto, and he said it was marked by things like blight, juvenile delinquency, widespread violence, which isn't always true. But we put those labels on it because, of course, that makes it less attractive, less valuable. And so we can then tear it down because we're going to put up something that's more important.
Better.
Better.
Something else to be said for, and this is one thing I have really enjoyed about this book, is his digging out the true statistics about things. The fact that yes, there is juvenile delinquency. Yes, there is crime in Black neighborhoods. It may not always be safe to walk in a Black neighborhood, although I lived in Washington, D.C. twice in the city. So, there's a little bit of that. But he pointed out that the white collar crime was a much bigger loss for the community when that happened. And, but it's hidden.
Yeah.
It's not in your face.
Yeah.
And that's why people believe the other statistic, because they can see, kids hanging on the corner or whatever. They don't see the guy, doing his dirty deals with his bank account.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you that it's more than just that, Pam. It is that, but white male America, can easily racialize the Black ghetto because I don't have to deal with any of that stuff. right? And I can overlook the crime that I cause, right? Because that would convict me more. So
If you
that's
look
part of
at
why.
ghetto, I gotta adjust this before I forget. I'm sorry. You said there's kids hanging on the corner. Again, you're looking at culturally different aspects of neighborhoods, right?
But it's
You
visible.
don't, white kids have places to go.
Yes.
White kids have centers that are maintained and updated.
Yeah.
When white America leaves the inner city is then a ghetto.
And
the
white kids
lies
have
aren't-
cars to get away too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where in an ethnic community, kids hanging around the corner, they hang around the corner because they don't have any other place to go. But it's assumed that there's a criminal element attached to the kids hanging around.
But there is a part of, there's white ghetto too. It's not, let's put it this way. A child who's from the white ghetto is always going to have an easier time than a child who is from the black ghetto for the most part. And because somebody might see them and think, oh, well, they're white, we'll give them a chance. But there is, those kids hang out, those kids have petty crime and stuff like that too, or they get involved in drugs. The kids in the upper class neighborhoods also get involved in drugs, but they have people to sweep it under the rug so that they don't get into as much trouble as the people who are in either any of the lower income areas.
But what you're talking about now, Pam, is a good transition to the second chapter because it's about intersectionality, right? And that's a really important term for us all to understand.
I never got it.
Okay, let me tell you what it is. I'm going to read a quote that's right near the end of the chapter 14. It said, Black feminists have been saying from the beginning that when humanity becomes serious about the freedom of Black women, humanity becomes serious about the freedom of humanity.
Yes.
And the reason for that is because Black women cover much of the intersectionality, the color, the gender, the poverty level, all these different things, which makes their climb up the ladder much more challenging than anyone else's, right? And each of us have some kind of advantage that makes it easier for us than what it is for the typical Black person, Black woman. But we don't have to be aware of that, do we? Because mine doesn't intersect in the same way. That's why I need you guys to help me understand how it is that feminism has been looked down on, pushed away, blockaded in some way or another, right? What obstacles did you guys face?
I want to mention a book I read. I don't even remember the title of it, a long time ago, by, I think she was the very first Black woman surgeon. And she eventually wrote a book about her experience at being a woman surgeon and a Black surgeon in a predominantly white environment, both in medicine and in surgery in particular, and a male environment. She said it was far, far, far harder to be female in that than to be Black.
Yeah.
So the gender was a much bigger judgment on her than being Black was. I thought that was so interesting.
Interesting.
My experience was still salaries. I mean, women, I think I've mentioned this maybe here before, that when I was hired at University of Arizona in the family medicine department, I had more degrees, more experience, and, very good reputation as a doc, and yet got paid significantly less than another male doc that was hired right out of residency. And I didn't know it at the time. And at that time, you couldn't look online and see what all the salaries were.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the courage or even the thoughtfulness to ask about what did other people get and to beat my own drum. I just said thank you and took the job. And yet I got paid way less.
Right.
And women's salaries are still way less.
But
And a
okay,
lot of
that's awesome.
universities have made an equitable change kind of thing, but it brought them up, but they're still way less.
But that's often because we put in place things like, don't anybody talk about their salary, so that I can
Yeah.
purposely pay you less then.
Yeah.
Right? We've put a lot of things like that into the system. Leticia.
And as much as women, I'm a different kind of feminist because I come from a culture where everybody knows the women are smarter, including the men. But I have, as a woman in business and being a person of color, I didn't have to worry about the men oppressing me. It was the other women that oppressed me, the progressive feminist women. And it's that whole, like you were talking about, somebody was talking about, I might be poor, but I'm not as bad off as these, or I'm not as, right?
Right.
I would get that same thing. And some of you heard this during the white privilege or white fragility class, is I had a progressive female come to me one day and said, Leticia, I feel so sorry for you. And I said, why? And she told me, because you'll never succeed in life. And I said, what makes you say that? And it was because she knew I had my first child at 18, right? Because you're a Latina, you were a Latina teenage mother. So, and I said, so why wouldn't I succeed? I bought my first house at 18.
Yeah.
And she said, because statistics say that you will never succeed. So even though you guys had to fight the male element, and you had to fight the misogyny and the chauvinism, you were never reduced as a whole to a statistic.
Yeah.
You were never objectified by your own gender.
Yeah. But part of all this, go ahead, Pam.
Well, what I was going to say is people have used various statistics to try to justify why they keep women from taking those positions, or why they keep a Black person from taking the position. And one of my favorites for women is that, well, a woman shouldn't be taking a job away from a man because he needs to be the breadwinner for the family.
Yeah.
Now, I realize that they were using this a lot before we had so many single parent families, but there were still a lot of those families when they were using that excuse.
Right.
And the thing in the book, the statistic that I was really struck by was about the Black single women percentage with having children out of wedlock was increasing, when actually it wasn't that their numbers were increasing, but the nuclear Black families, like all the other nuclear families in the country, were starting to have fewer and fewer children from the middle of the 20th century on. And I thought, how it is so easy to take a statistic and turn it around and make people think that something is happening when it isn't really true.
Yeah. And so you have to be really careful about any time you use statistics, or whenever you hear statistics, to try to see the larger picture of what it actually meant. Peggy?
Yeah. I was just going to share, you asked what kind of experiences we had in the workplace.
Yes.
I worked, or in life, I worked for large electronic corporations, Fortune 500 places. And at one point, my boss, I found out, first of all, accidentally, that one of my peers was making significantly more money than I was. And I went to go talk to my boss about what I might expect in the way of future increases. And he looked right at me and said, Peggy, you should never have to ask me for another raise. Your husband has a good job.
Yeah.
So that's just, I mean, I
Yeah.
could talk about this for 3 days, but
Yeah.
that's just one example.
Well, and it's that type of thing that we need to be very aware of. I put a question down as I was beginning to look at this chapter, and it changed as I went, as I kept thinking about it. The first question was something along the, what is it that this Black woman needs to be the most successful woman ever? But I thought maybe it's not woman that she needs to be successful at. Maybe it's doctor ever. Maybe, you know, and maybe it's not just Black. What is it that this person in front of me needs to be successful in whatever way they're defining themselves? Because all those modifiers that I put in there, all those ideas of what I think it ought to be, is in some way or another defining a path differently than that other person is thinking. But to do that well, I have to be in relationship with that person. I have to look at that single parent, Black mother, whoever she is, and say, what is it that what will help you? Because her goal might be, I want to be a really good mother. And I don't want to take that away from her by saying, no, you got to be in the workplace. You got to be better at your job, or whatever it is. If she wants to be better at her job, I got to figure out how to help her also do the mothering, even though this is her goal. And that's the hard part is and by we, I mean any dominant part of the culture that thinks that they already have the answer, anything that we put on that may or may not be what that person themselves put on.
Yeah, I think the important thing is if you're in that kind of a relationship with a person, regardless of whether it's a woman or a person of color or whatever, ask them what they need.
Yeah.
That, you know, I don't think it's our job to come up with solutions for them because we're going to be wrong. So you have to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
The misogyny in corporate America has been reduced, but you still see
It's still there.
white preferential treatment.
Yeah.
Now it focuses, like, I was up in Utah. And Utah is a different beastie kind of anyway. But 2009 when all the layoffs were going in. And they told me I was being laid off because last in, first out, right?
Yeah.
Well, there were 3 of us that were hired on the same day, virtually at the same time. I was the only minority. And I was told that because I was living with a man who made good money, the single women deserved the jobs more than I did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Regardless of my ability, experience, education, all of that, there was an excuse still made to go past me being I was the most economical, right? It took those 2 plus 2 more to replace my experience and my ability.
Yeah. It's
right.
Pam.
So it just shifts.
Yeah. Earlier in the summer, I've been joining in a Zoom class with my old science and religion and community class or society class in Washington, D.C. And earlier in the summer, when we were talking especially about Black Lives Matter, we were also talking about discrimination against women. And one of the people talked about some orchestra really was concerned that most of the first chairs in the orchestra or the conductor or whatever, I don't know what position it was, were always being filled by men, even though there were women who were more than adequate to be in the orchestra. And so this time around, when they were going to fill the position, they had the person play their instrument behind a screen.
Yep.
So they could not tell whether they were white, Black, woman, or man. And the outcome of the people who were hired was much more diverse than it had been, you know, over the last 100 years, really, in this orchestra.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And
Yeah.
so it's a good lesson to learn about any place that's hiring, is that, you know, somehow it's the person who is trying for a job should be disguised from ethnic group or whatever, you know. Even coming up to the last interview, to me, that last interview, as soon as they see him, could be the thing that could kill him. And it's heartbreaking, really.
Yeah, it is.
The other thing that, because I think you're absolutely right, Pam, is we need to somehow make it so that we don't let our preconceived notions get in the way. But I
People
think,
who think that they're not prejudiced
yeah, because we think
are.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
But I think we also have to very intentionally say, what obstacles does this person face that I don't have to see?
Yes.
What is it that's in her way? What's being held from her almost naturally? What is it that somebody at the table that's hiring is going to be saying? And not just in hiring, it's in all spaces. Where is it that that person faces something that's different than what everyone else has to face, or that different than a lot of us have to face?
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of intentionality. It takes me looking at my own preconceptions and purposely choosing differently than those preconceptions, right? But also encouraging other people to do that too, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna try and get my oldest to join in, at least one, because I told you she just recently said, "Oh my God, Mom, you really had to raise us deliberately." Because my children had an Anglo last name. They got the white skin from my father's side and their father's side, right? And they didn't look Hispanic, but culturally they identify as Hispanic. But I had to raise my kids telling them, you only admit to being Hispanic when it is a benefit to you.
Mhm.
But I shouldn't.
You shouldn't have to.
It's kind of laughable, but really isn't, Kay.
Yeah.
It really isn't,
Yeah.
because they had to deny half of their life,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right?
Right. And the more of those intersections that are of the lesser value, right? The more you carry of that, the more you have to deny yourself
Yes.
in
Mhm.
order to fit in.
And
Right.
my oldest said she took it to heart because she saw the obstacles that were put in front of me and how I fought for myself, and I fought against them, other people burdening my children because of with the same things, because they knew what color my skin was.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But the thing of it is those same intersectionality pieces, if we look at it, could be a strength. In the Methodist Church, for example, when we started letting women be pastors, which was fraught with all kinds of problems,
Yeah.
it also brings more naturally relational people into the pulpit that then approach the pulpit in a much different way than what the male hierarchy would do. And so it's given my profession a broader sense of what we can be, right?
And I would say exactly the same thing about medicine.
Yeah.
Women have a different approach to caring for their patients,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Yeah.
has expanded that doctor-patient relationship in a way that was needed.
Yeah. And so do we see it just for the difficulty, the difference that it is, or do we see it for the magnificence that it could be?
That's
Go ahead,
that's
Pam.
the thing that is good, but the problem that I have seen, at least as I've been watching the whole battle for women to gain their certain rights, is that in many positions, maybe not being a minister and not being a doctor, but in many positions, women have to be more like men in order to get ahead. And
That's
so
right.
It's true in
they have to
pastoring, believe me.
True
They
in
have-
medicine.
I bet it is.
they
Yeah.
have to take on certain aspects that they're not comfortable with in order to get ahead, or
Mhm.
or all they get is just in the door and they stop at that level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in order to progress, they have to become more like men, which
Yeah.
is unfortunate, really, because as you've said, Jim, everybody has something to add to the pot.
Yes.
And to say that, the soup would be very boring if it was all meat or, all potatoes. And so I just think that it's sort of heartbreaking when I see, like, especially in the political arena, women have to be like,
Men.
warmongers like everybody else, rather than be someone who is, really caring about running the country.
And can bring their feminine aspect into it,
Yes.
bring their ethnicity into it, can bring whatever they are and have that be valued rather than
A detriment.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
That's the problem right there. It's off those traits that women or whoever we're talking about bring to the party. Those traits are often not valued
You're
by
right,
the
Peggy.
organization.
You're right.
That's true.
Well, I'm going to tell you what helps me though. The whole time I'm reading this chapter, I'm thinking about one little girl, a girl I held when I baptized her, a girl you know really well. Her name is Cadence.
Yeah.
Who's going to be a Black woman growing up in America, raised by white parents,
Yes.
but going to have to negotiate a lot of these things we're talking about. And when I think about her, I go, it helps me to be able to humanize and say, what is it that I would want for her? This dear child that I love and have loved her whole life.
Yeah.
How do I make it so that she has the very best possible ability to advance and gets what it is that she needs in that successful thing, whatever that happens to be. I think that's what helps if I'm not looking at the unknown person in front of me, but try to humanize and know the real person in front of me, and see how it is that this thing, and this thing help her be more than what she would have been without those things. How her gender, how her race, how her class position affects who she is.
Mhm.
It's hard though, isn't it?
Mhm.
Well, and I think we could take a sort of a page from the idea that homogeneous, a group of homogeneous organisms is more susceptible to disease than the heterogeneous group is.
Yeah.
And so there's strength in that mixture rather
Yes.
than weakness in the mixture.
Yes.
Yeah, because especially now, in whatever profession you're in, there is somebody who's going to come there and will identify with the Black female better than what they will the white Oriental, and somebody else who will identify more this way. And so your organization, the broader they are, the more ability they have to be able to be connected in ways. That makes sense.
Yes, yes.
The hard part is that you have to be very intentional about doing that. But that's true in all these areas, isn't it? Whatever we're talking about, the easiest way is to fool yourself into thinking, well, gender doesn't matter to me because I'm privileged enough to not have to worry about it, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
Right?
Intentionality is an interesting word for me to hear when we're having this discussions from my end of the table, because I have always from the time I left my parents' house, I was told I had to be very intentional and not to be good to other people, but because I had to protect myself and my family.
Yeah.
And that is the hardest thing to convey during these conversations.
And I think he's trying to do the very same thing about it. He's trying to show very clearly the struggles he went through to be able to grow up and become at the space that he's at. I think also to be able to show that it's not like you all of a sudden arrive. As he said right at the beginning, it's an ongoing set of choices. It's an ongoing battle to decide how you're going to do all this.
Mhm.
So in these two chapters, the question, as it always is how's it going to make you act differently? What are you going to do differently? Is there a thing that's there that now is open to you that you didn't notice before this week? Right? That's the question you want to keep asking yourself. What do I change? How do I view that other person in a way that I haven't before? Not because you were intentionally bad before and suddenly you get to be a saint. Right? But because it's one more thing that you open up to.
Yeah, ladies, when Jim decided to do the white fragility class and then this class, I had to have some hard discussions with him. And I think, again, some of you that were in the classes with me for white fragility know that there are times I feel like I've run through my life skirting both sides because I was raised with privilege. But I didn't get to benefit from that class privilege the way whites do. So it's always been a really weird balancing act for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was also not Latina enough for the Latinos.
Mhm.
So it was, I think, Jim, didn't I tell you I didn't think I should be in these classes?
The good news is that everyone should be in these kinds of classes because we all bear some advantages, some disadvantages, some places that make it easier for us and some that make it harder for us. And it's a continual choice to try to be aware, not just of yourself, but of the people around you.
That's a good point because I look at my Latino brothers and sisters that are hardline Chicano activists,
Uh-huh.
that are hardline whatever activists. And I hear from them talking to white America the same thing I hear white American talking to me. You know, it comes from a different perspective, but to slip into racism, to slip into hatred is easy for both sides.
It is. And the bottom line is there's no perfect way to define what to do, right? There is no, in this moment, the male is better than the female or vice versa, right? Both bring different aspects to it that are going to solve that moment differently. Maybe one seems more efficient or more effective, or the other seems better in one way or another, but 2 steps down the road, it might be reversed, right? So how do we help each other to become the very best? How do we ask that question that I had at the top of the paper? What is it that this person needs to be successful? And then the questions of what obstacles are there and can I help with any of that?
Well, and I think that there's various levels of obstacles. I mean, some of them are written into law, and some obstacles are the people that you live with, and some obstacles are the town that you somehow have landed in, and so there's various. The obstacles are coming from all different directions, and
Right.
some are easier to get over than others, I think. And
Okay.
so maybe when we're thinking about what this person needs, we can start with the easiest and work from there.
Yeah. The good news is, Pam, we don't have to solve that other person, which we
No,
often thought we had to do, right? We've done a whole bunch of
Right.
stuff to try to solve.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was just gonna say. Pam, you said, as we try and figure out what this person needs, can I shift that thought a little bit for you?
Yeah, but I have to go very
Oh,
quickly.
ask them first.
I have
Ask
to
them
go
first
too.
what they want.
Yeah.
sometimes they don't know what they want.
Yeah,
That's an assumption too.
that's right. And,
I'm
and
Well, I
sorry,
guess I'm
Pam,
coming-
that's an
Coming
assumption
from my
too.
my grandchildren right now, who it's not a racial problem, it's a generational problem.
yeah,
And they are at a point where they see a world that is definitely not as welcoming as the world was when I was leaving high school. And it's very difficult to have discussions with them.
yeah.
Mm.
But being
That's
in those
unfortunate.
spaces is the key. It is looking at an individual in front of you, not a male or a female or a black or a white or a rich or a poor, but looking at this individual, right? And
Yeah.
doing that continually all the way through. All
All
right.
righty.
Thank you
See
very
you
much.
later.
Afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.
Wonderful getting to know you all.
It's okay.
Yeah, I'll pop you a note and let you know what's going on. And apparently my request from Thursday was a precursor to what I went through on Friday.
Nice. Good.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
so thank you.
Thank you.